Good evening. This is the day that the Lord hath made, and we ought to rejoice and be glad in it. What a blessing it is to be found once again, in the Lord's house. We thank each of you for joining us here at the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, located in Herndon, Virginia. We're back here once again on Wednesday in August with our conversations that matter. We've been having a blessed time over these last several weeks as we look at these conversations that are so important to us. The first week we dealt with, and our theme for this entire month, and our theme here at Mount Pleasant for the entire year is rebuild. And so we've been talking throughout Wednesdays in August. That first Wednesday we looked at rebuilding love. And the second Wednesday, we looked at rebuilding health. On last week, we talked about rebuilding wealth. And tonight, we're here to talk about rebuilding community. Such an important issue for our church and even the community that surrounds us and out further out in the community. And so we're grateful that you have joined us, whether you're watching us by Facebook or by YouTube. Won't you share this video with your friends? Let them know that Mount Pleasant Baptist Church is having a conversation that matters, and you need to be a part of this conversation. Let us pray. Oh, gracious God, we thank you, Lord, for allowing us this time to come together on tonight. We thank you, oh God, and we pray, Lord, that you would now just open up our hearts and our minds so that we may receive what it is that you have for us. We thank you in advance for what you shall do during this conversation. In Jesus Christ's name we do pray, and all God's people said amen. Once again, our conversation tonight is rebuilding community, and we want to make sure that you send in your questions. If you just send in the question, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, we're going to make sure that we get to your questions. We're grateful tonight to have with us our special guest tonight is Miss Makia Little. She is a candidate for the Virginia House of Delegates, the new 19th District, which will be held in 2023. Amen. Yes, 2023. And so we are grateful that she has come to be a part of this conversation tonight on rebuilding community. You know, when you look at the Word of God, when you look at the Bible, and you look at the book of Nehemiah, and really if you look at that first chapter, word gets back to Nehemiah that the community is in ruins. Nehemiah, that first chapter, starting at the third verse, says, "They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." And when I thought about that, and you know the end of the story, Nehemiah couldn't just sit on that information, but he had to do something about it. And the truth is when you think about some of the things that are going on in our communities, whether we're talking about in the school system, whether we're talking about economically, whether we're talking about some of the violence that is going on in our community, sometimes I watch the news and sometimes I watch what is going on in our communities, and like Nehemiah, it makes you weep when you watch the news at night and you see these young people who are literally, and not just here in Northern Virginia, but literally all over America, are literally shooting each other dead on the streets. It makes you weep. When you look at the things going on in our country, it makes you weep. And so the question that we have tonight is, what can we begin to do? The church has a long history of being a part of the community. The church has a long history of making a difference in the community. Whether we're talking about during the civil rights movement, we know we had Adam Clayton Powell and Dr. King and others, and just throughout our history, the church has always been a part of the community. But I don't know when it happened, but somewhere maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think the church got off focus when it started focusing on prosperity. And instead of doing what God called us to do, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and heal the land. Instead of doing what God told us to do, we focused on something that God never told us to do. And so here we are now. And so the question is, even in this post-pandemic time, our question tonight is, what can we begin to do to rebuild the community? So, Sister Little, I'm glad that you've come to join us on tonight. What do you think? What do you think the answer is?
Well, first, I want to thank you and your congregation for inviting me to be here to share thoughts and to have this conversation. I would say, as a Christian woman myself, first thing we have to do is get back to basics. And the basics of Christianity, Jesus set the example, is service. Mm-hmm. He gave us all talents. Mm-hmm. And in this era of prosperity that you describe, many of us have focused on using our talents for personal gain. Versus how can we leverage our talents in a way of service to our community. So first is to absolutely identify those areas in which he has gifted us talents, and then ask ourselves the question, how can I leverage my knowledge, skills, and ability, as we say in the federal government, for the benefit of my community versus self?
You said an interesting word, because I believe this is where I really think it starts and ends with service. I think because that is the only thing that's going to drive us. Something that we talk about in the church all the times is getting outside of the four walls. You know, there was a day in our communities where, you know, you could just open up your doors and you could expect them to come in. But the truth is that's not happening anymore. And so we've got to go out, and the thing is we have biblical examples. In the book of Acts, if you look at the early church, they went out into the community. They went out to serve. And so we've got to be willing in the church to go out and as you said, to be the servants that God is looking for. You know, the harvest is still plentiful, but the laborers are few. The servants are few. Tell me, what do you think are some of the most important areas that we need to begin to rebuild in our community? What are some of the, you know, you looked at Nehemiah, and Nehemiah heard all that was going on and he wept. What is it that ought to make us weep the most in our communities?
I would say the examples that we're setting for our children. As you explain, the church has a calling also to draw followers, believers to Christ. And if we are consumed with self-service, we're not drawing anyone. I believe there was a social media kind of viral incident where a pastor had kind of demonstrated a level of self-service that erupted not in his favor. And that has turned off a generation that would be followers of Christ. And so if they only see the church serving itself, or if they only see church members serving themselves, now we're essentially creating a pipeline issue of a generation of followers who would then educate and demonstrate the love of Christ for the next generation.
And you know, I had a conversation with another pastor about that very thing on this morning. You know, and we were talking about the effect that And the reality is now in our minds, we know that I think it was one pastor, who was supposedly robbed of why somebody would have $400,000 worth of jewelry on in church on Sunday morning doesn't make any sense to me, but but that pastor, and so since then he's been showing all of his worldly gain, and then you have another pastor who's on video complaining about the church not buying him a watch or something like that. And even though in our minds we know it's only two churches, and if you probably put those two churches together, they may not have 50 members. But the community sees that as the church. They don't know that, those two preachers are, I hate to use the word irrelevant, but in the real sense,
Outliers.
they're outliers. But the community, and so it does, and so we've got to really be careful about how we portray ourselves, especially. And see, this is as much as it's been a blessing that we've been able to go virtual, and everybody ain't ready for virtual. Every church is not. Everybody is not ready to be live. Some stuff needs to be,
pre-recorded, vetted.
In this last 2 years, I've seen some stuff from churches, and I think and see people who are outside the church see this, and they begin to think that this is what the church is all about. That's all that they care about. They don't care about the community. They don't care about what's going on in our schools. They don't care. Where is the church in all of this? And we've got to begin to address some of these issues. Yes. We've got to begin to address some of these issues. We've got to begin to look at what we can do. And one of the things that I told my church is that I think that one of the things that I've learned post-COVID and post-pandemic is collaboration. Mm-hmm. We cannot continue to try to go out there all by ourselves, but we've got to learn how to come together with others who are like-minded, who want to see the community better, who want to see the community rebuilt, and we've got to put our heads together. And as we kind of talked about, off camera, we got to put ego aside, we've got to put self aside, and we've got to ask, what can we begin to do to really truly rebuild our community?
So about building partnerships, and what I actually appreciate, especially as a woman of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the fact that you do wear your Omega Psi Phi fraternity shirt. You are setting an example for what an Omega man can be. Mm-hmm. Whereas, if you go on social media, that may not be the consistent image that others see. And so when they see Omega and church, now it's like, oh, okay, you can still be in the world, but not of the world, if you will. And that draws. Another area of collaboration is among the Divine Nine. Mm-hmm. We can get caught up and joke about our calls and who came first and all that, but at the end of the day, our missions are the same. Mm-hmm. Our calls from our founders is the same. Mm-hmm. So areas where we have overlap, why stay divided? Mm-hmm. Come together. And in the realm of politics, there are apolitical ways to still get involved that allow for that separation of church and state, if you will. Voter education, voter outreach, voter registration. And when you combine the infrastructures of the various organizations, now you have a powerhouse that can really make a dent, make an impact on the community. And that demonstration for the next generation shows that, wait, we don't always have to be against each other or say who's better. When we have the same purpose, when we're called to the same service.
Yeah, and I think, I think you said it, it comes down to what is the best for community. And when we, one of the things that we talk about often, and it's kind of been a theme in these last 3 weeks, is getting our eyes and our focus on God. And building that relationship with God. And when you build that relationship with God, you understand that it ain't about me.
You understand the assignment.
You understand the assignment. You understand the assignment. And why is it that so many in our community don't seem to understand the assignment?
Again, I think I'll put it to you this way. During my time in the federal government, I did what's called a joint duty assignment at CIA. Mm-hmm. And there was a senior executive that I was encouraged to just meet with. And he was just passing out gems of wisdom because he had like 1 week left until he was about to retire. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he shared with me, and he was a Caucasian male, he said, there are no good races or bad races. There are no good genders, bad genders, good regimes, bad regimes. He said there are simply people who are about self and those who are about community. He said there's 3 bins where your behavior should fall if you're about community. 1, helping people. 2, solving problems. 3, helping people solve problems. And he said, if you cannot bend your action, energy, what have you, in one of those 3 buckets, chances are you've been drunken by power. And so I really believe that it's more of a question for, we all have power. How are we choosing to use it? And that is a personal choice.
Okay, now see, you went over too fast, something good. So, helping people.
Solving problems.
Solving problems.
Helping people solve problems.
Helping people solve problems. Helping people, solving problems, helping people solve. I like that because I believe that's a start. That's where, so, yeah, that's good. So, helping people, solving problems, helping people solve problems.
Yes.
All right. I like that because if we have that, I think if we have that focus and we have that mindset, see, and even knowing the power that we have behind us. Mm-hmm. See, I believe that's why the civil rights movement, for instance, was so successful. Even with everything against them, even with where America was at the time, it was successful because it was truly about helping people.
Yes.
It was about helping people live better lives, yes. No longer having to live in a segregated society. And it wasn't about, even though, Dr. King was put up, the reality, it was still about the people. And that's why, even if you look at the outcome, what was the outcome? Well, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all of those it wasn't Dr. King got this and got this, but it was about the people. And too much of what we do I've been in rooms where we've talked, and I'll just use it as an example from the church perspective. Several years ago, we had, and a good while ago, but even before pandemic, this was when Barack Obama first ran for president. Historically, there are 4 major Black Baptist conventions in America. We can talk about the history and why they split, but that's neither here nor there. But we came together.
Yes.
We came together. First Black man running for president, and it just so happened that all 4 presidents at that time of those conventions were all graduates of Bishop College. Wow. And that was kind of the link that got them together. And so they decided, you know what? Let's have a joint meeting.
Love it.
Here we have first Black man's running for president. We really want to push him, and let's do this. It's not about ego. Let's come together. We had a meeting in Nashville, Tennessee at the Gaylord Hotel. It was fabulous. People who you hadn't seen in years because they were maybe in a different convention. We all came together as one to talk about purpose. Yes. But you know how we do. Ego got involved.
And people want credit. And I think there's a saying out there that says, you can accomplish anything as long as you don't care about who gets the credit.
As long as, and I think that's really what the start, as you said, our focus has to be on how can we help people. And what people don't understand is it starts with small things. On yesterday, our church went to, I think there were 7 of us, went to Leesburg Elementary. We fed the staff. That's not a big thing. It's not but it's a start. And it's about building relationship in the community. And so we happened to be able to talk to the principal of Leesburg Elementary about, and he was telling me about some of the stuff that we could actually do. You know, we have members of our church who are experts. We have some who've been through education, some who've done this, who could be a help to a school. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's something small, but when it's about helping people, as you said, when it's about solving, so he told me, he said, our biggest issue is, you know, because of where they are in Loudoun County and the you know, the people who make up his school, you know, may not be the top level. And he said, our biggest issue is resources. Well, that's what the one thing that the church has.
Right.
Is resources.
And so here's another thing that just came to me is the issue of trauma. And I think over the years, we specifically, African Americans, have developed a level of community trauma where we've almost become conditioned to folks taking advantage of us. And so we've all shifted from a place of service, where now we've had years and even generations of feeling taken advantage of, to I have to look out for me and mine. And so now it's almost like this kind of quid pro quo. Well, if I help you with this, what can you do for me? Or I'm not going to put more into this than I'm going to get out, because then I'll be working from a deficit. And so I think we have to remember that, again, Jesus set the example and made the ultimate sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And service is not a business deal. It is not a tangible physical transaction. It is the act of humility and recognizing that he gave us the ultimate gift. Mm-hmm. So everything that we have is already his. Yeah. And us allowing him to work through us is not devaluing ourselves. It is, as some would say, the price that we pay for our time on earth.
And that's true. And so we've got to figure out what is the best way to put that service into action to be a benefit to our communities. You know, we've got to figure out, you were showing me the video earlier, kind of how you got into the politics thing. When you went to, Elijah Cummings was having the conference, it looked like, and you asked the question, but he said something interesting in that conversation that I saw. He said that we sit around at Thanksgiving and we talk about the issues and we talk about the problems and we sit in our corners, and yet we don't ever do anything about it. Right. And that's kind of how he encouraged you, I think, to do something about it.
Yes, and I tell everyone all the time, he didn't call me out, he called me up. But what he was trying to get across, and transparently and frustration, because I could tell based on the energy in that conversation, it wasn't the first time he was having it with a young person. Mm-hmm. And he just saw power shrinking. And so his point was, you have everything you need to fix this problem yourself. You don't need me. Mm-hmm. And I felt him pouring into me to inspire me to fix it my daggone self, you know. And I have not been able to get his voice out of my head ever since, and this was 2019, a few months before he passed. And so it's like when you see something that isn't just as his political twin, John Lewis would say, you have to be willing to get into good trouble and say something. Use the education, the wherewithal, the resources, the connections even, the network that you have. All of us have power. And so when we carry ourselves as if there's nothing we can do about it, we do a disservice to the next generation where we benefited from our predecessors, our ancestors, using the lesser, if you will, when you talk about resources, education, and opportunities. They had fewer resources and did more. Mm-hmm. We inherited the benefits of their labor, and now we act like we can't do anything.
Yeah, and that's so true. And I think about, as I said, when you look at historically, from the church perspective, the church never set out issues. We just gonna sit this one out. The church was always at the forefront when it came to issues in our community. And it just seems like, as when Nehemiah heard heard word back that the walls were torn down, they were in despair. And it's like, we come to church, we talk about a lot about the problems that we have in society, we talk about the problems we have going on in our community, but it's like we just sit over in the corner and say, well, we just go kind of, we just go, thoughts and prayers, as and we never move on the issue. Mm-hmm. We never move, we never actually get truly invested in what's going on in our community. And then we wonder, how come the community looks at us the way that they do?
And I would just kind of foot stomp that and say that the church was our primary source of power, the collective. And we've allowed ourselves to somewhat be separated from our own power, essentially playing politics because we don't want to make people uncomfortable. Mm. And if we don't want to make our own people uncomfortable, how can we then make those who would be against us uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And there's unity and power when we can all get together and agree that this isn't right. And then we put together an action plan to do something about it. But if we're afraid to have the uncomfortable conversations, we never come together. And we don't have the force to push back that's necessary for change.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think I think one of the issues is we've gotten so caught up in buildings, budgets, and bodies. That's been such our focus: buildings, budgets, and bodies, that we are afraid. Because if it's going to make me lose people, mm-hmm. if it's going to make my bottom line go down, right. If it's going to make I'm just, I'm not going to have that uncomfortable conversation. And the thing is, that's just not who we are historically. As I said, it was, if you look at even I think Barack Obama will tell you, from even going back when you look at when Jesse Jackson ran in 84 and 88, his base was the black church. Yeah. When you look at, and I remember when Obama first came out, people were like, well, Barack Obama, who is that? A junior senator from Illinois, but he had that base with him. And that's still, and I think that's why, even yourself running for office, I think that's why politicians still come by the church, because they realize, and yet it's like we don't realize our own power if we would just get up, if we would just be about being servants and understand what these issues are in our community. And we don't, I had a conversation with somebody one day, and I said, if I asked 10 different people to write what are the most 10 important issues in our community, they would all 10 write probably 10 different things.
Absolutely, because we don't have the conversations, right?
Exactly,
To
yeah.
understand, well, I could see this being a priority, but I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
You know, and then you realize, wait a minute, that's an issue for you too.
Yeah.
And another thing, specifically in the Black church or in the Black community, we know we have this thing of keeping our business to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we don't even want to share our real challenges or real issues because we want to put on this facade to get across a certain image, what have you, or to protect ourselves from judgment. And another thing is how we, as humans, measure our own success, right? So you just mentioned budgets and all that. You know, so some churches measure their success in the size of their building.
Yeah.
Some measure their success in the number of followers or online followers. Or Stephen Furtick, I consider him my pastor, had preached this past Sunday about a culture of likes and follows. And it's like, if you measure your success in that way, you're going to be constantly trying to appeal to the whims of humans.
That's right.
Right? Yeah. And so we also have to be willing to accept and embrace that we all should only have an audience of one. And at the end of the day, our collective goal should be to hear, well done.
Exactly. And that's where being a servant, that's where it has to, and that's why I go back, it has to start with being a servant. And we have to be, you know, I like that, because we are. Everybody wants to be liked. And we're shooting for likes. And so we've got to say stuff that is, you know,
palatable.
Yeah, that people can take. And so, and so much of our preaching and teaching even has gone that way, that, well, I'm not going to push the button. I'm not going to
rock the boat.
Yeah, you know, we don't have any. I don't know if you've ever heard of Vernon Johns, but Vernon Johns actually preceded Dr. King at Dexter Avenue in Alabama as pastor. And Vernon Johns was one of those people, he just didn't care. And so I'll never forget, there was a young black girl who had been raped. And the police didn't do anything about it. And so he actually put on his marquee at his church that it's okay to rape young black girls. And of course, his church was like, oh my God, you know, because they were worried about how they were going to, we are so worried about how we're perceived.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be this and we don't want to be that. But I think about historically, imagine what those in the past, if they had taken on that ideal. You know, we've got to do something about gun violence in America. You know, we've got to do something about the educational system in America. And I don't understand, and we've got to do something about the gap, the wealth gap in America. You know, and all of those issues are issues that are community issues. And we've got to be willing to be a part of the conversation. And too often, it's like the church is isolated by itself. It's over here by itself. It has Sunday. But what happens Monday through Saturday?
Right. And not just the church, but I would even say, you know, just speaking for politicians, you know, we want to stay in our lane, stay focused on, I'll say, you know, our races, our wins, our what have you. And there's not a lot of collaboration, partnering, as you mentioned earlier. And so even with trying to do outreach to say, okay, well, I know this is going to be an issue in my district. You know, what's the issue in your district? It's like, oh, well, you have a primary. I can't talk to you. Or that's outside of your district. You don't need to worry about that. It's like, but we all drink the same water. So why would we not collaborate, converse, and say, okay, these are the issues. Where can we find alignment to enhance support to move this issue forward as a community? If we stay in our silos, and everyone knows this one, united, we you know, divided we fall. So how do we bridge those divides that have us with blinders on to say, I only need to worry about me and mine, without recognizing that's not service?
Yeah. It is, and you know, and you have to look beyond you.
Yes.
You have to look
Bigger than you.
You know, I that we love to talk about 2 Chronicles 7. You know, if my people, who are called by my name, the church, before they pray, before they seek my face, before they turn from their wicked ways,
Hear my voice.
humble themselves. Got to show, and that's what service is about. Service is about humility. Service is about lowering yourself. Service is about, you know, Dr. King in Memphis the night before he was killed saying, listen, you know, I don't know what my fate is going to be. I don't know what's going to happen to me now. But I know what's going to happen to you. I have seen the promised land. And I may not get there with you. And I don't think there just aren't enough people in our community who are willing to say, you know what? If I ain't getting there with you, I really don't care about what everybody else is doing because I'm worried about me.
Right, and even you know, I'm mother of 3, but if you take the movie Moana, and how each leader would put a rock on this stack, that to me is a strong visual where, you know, none of them are going to see the top of that stack, you know, but that's not the goal. The goal is to keep building, keep moving the people forward, keep getting higher. And as long as we run the race set out for us, right, and contribute where God has gifted us, all of our time on this earth is temporary. So if we can't accept that and say, okay, what can I do with the gifts, time, resources that he's given me for his glory, then you're operating from a place of selfishness.
Okay. So we've gathered together. We've had the huddle. We've talked. We're ready to go out and serve. What do you think, looking at society right now, what do you think are the issues that need to be addressed the most?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Obviously, in our country, human rights are under attack. Roe versus Wade definitely kind of did a table flip just from the time that I've spent door knocking before Roe versus Wade. It was a mixture of issues and concern, but once that was overturned, that quickly shot up to the top because people could see the connectivity to this is where we start to unravel our democracy. This is where we no longer have autonomy over our own medical decisions. And it may be for women this time, but that's still more than like half our population. And it still has impact on men. And if we start now this precedence of removing laws that were put in place to get America closer to the promise, at what point do we no longer recognize our country? At what point are we back in chains? You know?
Yeah, and I think so civil rights, human rights, what else?
Definitely education is an area where there's clearly been an attack on public education. And it's been multifaceted. You know, it's not just the content of education, it's the accessibility of educational opportunities, trying to privatize it and basically invest public dollars into charter schools where those are already with resources.
Yeah, this whole idea of abolishing the Department of Education.
Right, and then attacking teachers. Who are already underpaid and over assigned. You know, my sister was kind of complaining against having bus duty. Like, that's not in my contract.
And then wonder how come all over the country we have a
Great resignation.
A lack of teachers, and we have school districts who can't even open up school because they have so many teachers open it. Well, you've spent the last 20 years bashing teachers,
right.
You know, underpaying them, and now you wonder how come nobody wants to be a teacher.
Absolutely. And then absolutely from a place of accountability, law enforcement. We really need to address law enforcement accountability. Before there were cameras on phones, these issues were happening. We just didn't have evidence of it. You know, I think I saw that there's a movie coming out on Emmett Till. And I honestly don't think I can watch it because it's not like this is a historical film. This is still happening today. And it's what makes the news is when an officer is actually held accountable, because that is the outlier now.
Yeah.
And I believe that law enforcement accountability has to start at the very top. So we can't have entities responsible for investigating themselves and expect fair outcomes. So until we get policies and systems in place that force accountability, that epidemic will continue.
Yeah, I know one of the things that myself and other pastors in Fairfax have been working. You know, we've had some issues with law enforcement in Fairfax County, specifically Fairfax County the Sheriff's Department. And I know that you know, we've been having these discussions with the new top chief of the Fairfax County Sheriff's Department about some of these issues. And I think that's where we've got to care.
Yes.
It's about caring. If I don't know, you know, I remember a day in our community, you know, where community mattered. You know, the whole thing about, you know, it takes a village mattered.
Yes.
You know, people cared about what happened on their street. You know, if Miss Sally saw you doing something.
Oh, your mama's gonna get a call.
Exactly. You know, first of all, Miss Sally didn't have
So
no
you're
problem
right. She
grabbing
said
you herself. She had no problem grabbing you herself. But for, you know, we've gotten away from that. And so now it's everybody, you know, folk can be neighbors and not know one another.
Right.
And so, you know, people don't, well, that didn't have anything to do with me. And so since it didn't have anything to do with me, I'm not going to worry about it. And I just don't think we can't be successful that way. Our communities can't be rebuilt that way. It takes the effort of, and it takes all entities, not just the church, but the church has to come together and work with the business community and work with education and work with this group and that group. And we got to figure out how we can put our heads together, you know, and come together to begin to rebuild our communities.
And I think the way that God designed us was magical, right? It was for a community, which is why you'll very rarely find two people with the same exact gift set, right? Where you're talented, I'm weak. Where I'm talented, you're weak. But when you put us together, now, you know, the team together, everyone accomplishes more. And so he literally designed us for community because no one person can do everything on their own. And so if we don't lean into that power, we're losing.
I got you. What are some strategies for the church and individuals to work on rebuilding safety in our community? I know that's an issue that a lot of people talk about. Many communities, people don't even feel safe going, you know, at home at night. And so what are some strategies that the church and politicians and other organizations in the community can come up with to begin to rebuild safety in our communities?
So every community is different and every safety concern is different. For instance, in my district, homelessness drives the lack of security in certain areas. And so coming together to develop strategies to mitigate homelessness or develop opportunities for job retraining may be the answer, right? In other places, it may be there's not enough resources for youth. And so we need to make sure that we're having conversations with our youth to figure out what their interests, passions, talents are and redirect that energy. In other places, it may be gun violence. And then again, those are going to be different conversations. And so as a certified diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, there's no one size fits all. It's really having the deep dive conversation to get at what is the root cause of this particular issue in this particular area, and how can we creatively combine our talents to come up with the solution. What resources do we need? Who has that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah.
and let's put this jigsaw thing together.
Because and whatever your issue is, whatever your particular safety issue is, it is important. And when you have a community where people don't feel safe, that's a I can remember communities where like churches had to stop having church at night because people felt unsafe coming to church, and it's like, so our, the reaction is, okay, well, let's just stop having church instead of dealing with the issue of safety, instead of dealing with that issue and saying, okay, what can we do? As you said, what are some strategies? How can we come together? How can we, face this issue head on? I think we oftentimes almost, it's like, okay, well, they won.
Right, and I think that comes from everyone wanting to stay within their comfort zone, right? It's too much work to investigate, or it's too uncomfortable for me to ask that person, why did you do this thing? We like to put people in boxes and then tell them why we think they did X, Y, and Z instead of having an actual conversation. I think at the Tunica Policy Conference, there was this conversation with some mental health professionals where they were saying, someone can come into my office and I can tell them what I think they need, but if I don't first listen to them, I'm not really helping them. So the uncomfortable task of listening instead of jumping to judge and just saying, okay, well, this is what I can control and this is how I'm gonna resolve it, when you're really just essentially putting a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, and I think that's important to, and I think that's why, it's important that I think you have to have that mentality of a servant. And see this, because I think when it comes to a lot of issues, the church doesn't get involved because we can be somewhat judgy.
Yes, yes. I wasn't going to go there, but yes.
We can be somewhat judgy. And so we automatically, and that doesn't mean we stop standing on our principles or start standing on what our belief is, but, and what I say a lot of times is the problem is really hypocrisy.
Yes.
Because, the very things that we judge people on, we find ourselves, doing also. So I think that's really one of the main issues.
Yes, and back to the issue of drawing, you literally have adults who are my age who experience the trauma of church judgment. And so we don't want that for our children, and we don't force or bring our children to church because we don't want them to have that same experience, the traumatic experience, and now they associate that with their relationship with God.
Yeah, and because of see, people see the church different today than they even saw the church 20 to 25 years ago. As I said, when you look in this age of social media and quick videos and TikTok and Instagram and just clips, so often these clips that you see are negative about the church. And you don't see, a video of a pastor getting robbed is going to be viewed 1 million or 2 million times. And people are going to ask, why does he have on $400,000 worth of jewelry? A picture of a church providing lunch for a school in its district is going to be viewed 100 times.
Right, because that's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah,
it's not sensational, clickable.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we have to do a better job of how we really represent God.
Absolutely.
I mean, we are God's representative. Jesus says, and you shall be my witnesses. And so we've got to do a better job of witnessing and being witnesses for Christ. And that means going back to what we start with, that goes back to being servants. If we would just humble ourselves and show ourselves, I'm not here to be in charge. I'm not here to cast judgment on you. I'm just here to serve. I'm just here to do what I can to help our community.
And I think it's no one can do everything, but everybody can do something. And as long as we remember that, because everyone has seasons, right? There are seasons where I had a 1, 2, and 3-year-old. I wasn't doing nothing but trying to raise those babies. But now that they're older, it's like, okay, I have a little bit more time to give outside of my home. How can I leverage the experiences God has given me and move my people forward?
Yeah. And so often issues are all around us. And if we would just open up our eyes, you know, my DMin project for my doctoral degree was on the church's response to homelessness in the community. I was pastoring in Columbia, South Carolina then, and I had started my DMin work, but I had not chosen my project yet. And so I was working on one of my I was working on that first year you do your autobiographical statement. And I was working on that in the local library, and it was filled with homeless people. Now this library was probably less than half a mile from my church.
Wow.
But I didn't know why all of these homeless people were in this library. So I finally went up to the librarian and asked her, I said, is there a reason all these homeless people are in here? She said, yeah. Now, I knew the shelter was across the street. She said, see, that shelter is across the street, and they feed them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And in between, the city has decided as long as they, you know, are respectful and show that they're doing something, they can kind of hang out here while they're waiting to go get lunch and go get dinner. And it just hit me that here I was pastoring a historical church, and we had zero ministry to the homeless.
But see how you ask the question. And that's where service starts, right? Not
Asking
making an
the
assumption,
question.
asking the question, sometimes just asking the question. And also not just asking the question of those around us, but asking God, like, why is this, and I'll just say bothering me. But a sermon that I heard, I want to say from a guest minister at Elevation Church, he talked about a unique agitation. And so the same way we have gifts and talents, we also have a unique agitation in us that's aligned with our purpose. And so I may see that situation and it doesn't bother me, but you see it and it bothers you. Guess what? You're called to do something about it. And you ask the question. And so I think, you know, outside of reading books like The Purpose-Driven Life or just having that one-on-one intimate prayer with God, we also have to ask him the question, you know, why am I here? What is my assignment? And be patient enough and quiet enough for him to speak to us and then do something about that thing for his glory.
Okay. Another question we had, and it deals with going back kind of to the safety, and I think as a former law enforcement, you can probably help us with this. I know it's an issue that we hear. What can we do about this issue of human trafficking? So,
absolutely, that starts locally in our communities to make sure that we understand who our leaders are, which entities are responsible for what, right? There's legislation that can be done on the federal level, state level, local level, and then obviously school board and community councils. Making sure that we are all aware, not just who our representatives are, but what the primary law enforcement issues are in our community. Teaching our children, having these uncomfortable conversations with our children, how to recognize signs of distress in other children. There are ways where, again, if that is your unique agitation, getting smart on the issues is going to be very important. And so recognizing that there are behaviors There are institutions that foster and perpetuate human trafficking. And then once we identify those, who do we contact? You know, how do we report this? How do we hold people accountable? So a lot of it just takes individual research and an understanding of how to break down.
And see, even an issue like that, see, it's I don't know, it's just my belief that even stuff like that, we have to, like, bringing somebody in to talk to the church.
Yeah.
Somebody say, well, that ain't got nothing to do with church. Well, it does, because these are our children.
Yeah.
These are, you know, our babies are the ones that are being trafficked.
Yes.
And so we've got to, you know, we've got to be educated about, you know, if it's just simple teaching a parent, a mother and a father, what to look for.
Right.
You know,
And-
signs and different things like that.
And as a survivor of domestic violence, one of the things that I had to do once I recognized that I was in an abusive relationship is I had to educate myself on what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like, which is one of those conversations growing up. You know, you're just told to find someone equally yoked. Okay, well, what does that mean, you know? But to understand what respect looks like, what love looks like, what manipulation looks like, what control and an abusive power look like in the context of a relationship. If I don't understand that, how can I have that conversation with my daughters? If I don't understand that, how can I have that conversation of what not to do with my son? Or making sure he doesn't associate with people who would mistreat members of the opposite sex. And when you talk about behavior online, social media, monitoring who they're talking to, not feeling like we have to be their friends, but making sure they understand we're coming from a place of protection and not control. Being transparent. You know, we came up under parents who said, you know, that's grown folk business. You stay out of grown folk business. Well, our kids are acting grown, and they're exposed to things that only adults should be exposed to. So again, if we're not having those uncomfortable conversations, to say, I know how this may feel, how it may be perceived, but this is for your protection. And then constantly attach that or associate that with, and this is how this plays out in this situation. So that they are equipped with the tools to understand, wait, I think I heard something about this, or I remember something about this, and alarms are going off. Maybe this isn't something that I should do. But if we don't have those conversations, they're defenseless.
And I think, you know, and that's why I think it's so important, as I said, if the church is going to serve, I think it's important for us, because the reality is there are a lot of parents who, they don't know where to get that information from. They just don't. They don't know where to get that information from. And so the church, if we have the resources, we've got to be able to provide those resources for those within the church and for those from outside of the church, to allow them, and that's how we build. That's how we begin to build community.
One of the most helpful resources I've found in my own personal learning journey, and now talking to my teenagers about dating, is a website called loveisrespect.org. And they have a lot of tools on showing what healthy, unhealthy, and abusive relationships look like. And the interesting thing about it is it's not even just about male-female or romantic relationships. This is where sometimes bullying can also come into play, where you have a power structure. You know, everyone knows the it girl or the mean girl, but the same tools that are used to manipulate in romantic relationships can also be used to manipulate in just peer relationships. And you think it's your friend, and you want to be liked, right? You know, living for the likes. And so you capitulate and do whatever, not realizing you've actually set yourself up for harm. Because now they're going to hang out with, I'm just going to say Tyrone, and you want to go along to get along, and now you're in a situation where you are defenseless.
Yeah. And I think those, as I said, it's my belief that, we've got to care about the whole person, not just the spiritual, but the physical, but the emotional, I think that is the only way we build community, is to care about the entire person. And so, I go back to, as you said, it's all about being a servant. It's all about making up in my mind that I just want to serve God wherever and what I've learned is God can see, when we think of service, and I had somebody tell me this one day, said that one of the issues is when we think of service as believers, we think God can only use us inside the church.
No.
And God can use us anywhere. God can use us even to run for politics. God can use us in the business world. God can use, as long as you keep that I'm just a servant.
Yes, and I can attest to feeling like this wasn't something, I chose. It was a calling, and one of the conversations that I had transparently with God was, I don't want to become one of those politicians that gets to the other side and forgets why they were there and loses that connection, because I have a hard time believing that all corrupt politicians started off that way, and he and I kind of had some back and forth where he had to make it clear to me that as you outlined, as long as I keep myself humble, we will be just fine. And that following Sunday, Stephen Furtick preached a sermon called Bent Knees Break Chains. And I just felt him talking directly to me. And I'm like, do they have Alexa or something installed in my house? Like, how did he know this is what I was struggling with? Mm-hmm. And it's like, when you are honest and transparent with him even, he will speak back and order your steps.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you 100%. The final question for the night is, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, and has the church lost or minimized its influence within the community? And what more can we do to be the first source of moral thought when people are faced with difficult decisions? I don't think there's any doubt. I think when you just look at the numbers, even pre-COVID, on a monthly basis, people were coming to church less and less. And like I said, this is not something because of COVID. Mm-hmm. Even before COVID, Barna told us that the church did not have the influence that it once did. And I guess, I think, my answer to that is, what can we do to be that? I think we have to focus on being servants.
Yes, but you also have to show up. And speak up. And one of the things that God calls us to do in the Bible is to hold people accountable. If your neighbor wrongs you, you go to them in private. Mm-hmm. And if they won't hear you, you bring 2 or 3. And if they still won't hear them, you bring them to the church. And if they still won't hear the church, you treat them like a pagan. Mm-hmm. And so if we aren't willing to speak truth to power as a body, then we allow God's message to become corrupted in these streets, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's where we're called to draw from. So if I see no difference between what is being said on the news and there's no response to it from the church to correct that, then okay, what they say on the news is.
Exactly. So when, and most of us and so when you see somebody who calls themselves an evangelical on TV, and they're spouting, and all you do is you ever hear from them, and we sit silent on these issues, even some of these moral issues.
Silence is compliance.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. That's right. Silence is compliance. And when we sit and don't say anything, and they're doing all the talking, well, they become the voice. And so what happens is, and so people who don't want to hear, they almost give up on the church because that's all they hear. Because you know what? But we sure did have a good time in church Sunday. We came here and we had a good time praising the Lord. And now we didn't worship to serve, but we had a good time.
Right. And I mean, I won't get into the whole Greek history, but that was one of the things that drove Delta Sigma Theta to say, no, we need to be more socially active and socially engaged. And so what I do love that has happened recently is the Divine Nine organizations have started coming together to figure out how we as a collective can be more socially involved and active and be that leader in the community where a void has essentially been left.
Yeah, and I'll close, and it's a shame to me that when others can see it, you talked about the Divine Nine, and other organizations can see the importance of coming together to really rebuild our communities.
Yes.
And yet, too many churches still act like we are solo, by ourselves. We can't even work with other churches.
But we'll tell you about the building fund. I'll tell you about the building fund.
we can work with other we can't even work with other churches. So if we can't work with other churches, how are we going to work with those outside the community? Well, listen, let me thank you so much for coming and joining us on tonight to this really crucial conversation that matters, how we can rebuild our communities. I think you blessed us and you helped us. I'm still stuck on help somebody, solve problems, help someone solve a problem. And I think if we would just get our mindset as being servants and focus on that we're just trying to go out. What can we do as a body of believers to help somebody? What can we do to solve a problem? What can we do to help somebody solve a problem?
And
I think if we would just have... Go ahead.
Thank you for being the change that you want to see in the
Amen.
church. Thank you.
Amen. Once again, we are grateful that you have joined us on tonight for another important conversation that matters, talking about rebuilding community. Our prayer is that this is just an initial conversation. One of the things that we talked about doing as just something small is going out into the community through our schools. We started on yesterday with Leesburg Elementary. We plan on going to a different school. Next up is Fairfax County, and then after that we'll be going to Prince William County. That's a small start to see what we can do to be a blessing to our communities, to be a blessing to our schools, to see how we can begin to rebuild community. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure you join us on next Wednesday night, our final Conversations That Matter. We'll be talking about rebuilding faith. One of the things during COVID is our faith has been challenged. Oh, our faith has truly been challenged. And so we're going to talk about next week what we can do to rebuild our faith. God bless you and God keep you until next week.
Hi, here are your Mount Pleasant Baptist Church ministry announcements.
MPBC family and friends, each Wednesday in August, we will have Conversations That Matter. Pastor Donaldson will be joined by a special guest each Wednesday night to discuss an issue that matters to the body of Christ. Our theme is Rebuild. Each Wednesday night, they will discuss how the church can begin to rebuild in this post-pandemic age. Here is the subject matter for each remaining Wednesday in August. August 24th, Rebuilding Community, and August 31st, Rebuilding Faith. Please make plans to join us for these conversations that matter. Mount Pleasant, The start of our month-long celebration of the MPBC 156th anniversary is right around the corner. The month-long celebration opens with our annual revival on Thursday, September 1st. Revival services will take place each Thursday night throughout the month of September, starting at 7 p.m. Please make plans to come into the house of the Lord as we are revived together. Each Thursday night will include a local guest artist. Our guest psalmist on Thursday, September 1st is Shamika Hill, and we ask that you please take note of the guest speakers for the month. September 1st, Reverend Michael Sessom of Little Union Baptist Church in Dumfries, Virginia. September 8th, Reverend Dr. Louis B. Jones II of Pilgrim Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. And then on September 15th, we have Reverend Lucinda Kent of Van Buren UMC in Washington, D.C. And finally, on September 22nd, Reverend Dr. Keith Bird of Zion Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. Please make plans to join us each Thursday night for revival, one with another. We continue our month of celebration with historical moments throughout the month. Whether historical pieces within each Sunday's service or MPBC moments shared on our social media platforms, our goal is to ensure you know our history. Now listen, I'm announcing it now. There will also be a one body many parts challenge that it would absolutely take each of you to complete. Stay tuned as you learn more about the challenge as the month unfolds. I know, we're being coy, but here's the first clue. The picture can only come together with your involvement. Now, please pay attention to those historical nuggets because you will need those on Saturday, September 24th, when every member of Mount Pleasant Baptist Church is needed on the campus as we kick off our 156th church anniversary weekend. I'll go ahead and get the food out of the way now. Smoke That Barbecue will be serving fried fish, burgers, hot dogs, and even vegetarian options. We'll have candy apples, ice cream, and everything in between. There will be fun activities and games to serve those from our youngest to our oldest, including a gaming truck and video booth. Highlights of the day will include our Bible trivia and MPBC historical points game. We are excited that everyone will be able to put their Bible and MPBC historical knowledge on display. And then we will come together to complete the 156th anniversary One Body, Many Parts Challenge. The weekend continues with our anniversary worship service on Sunday filled with high praise and worship led by our Mount Pleasant Baptist Church Mass Choir and featured artist of the day. You will certainly want to be in the building. There will be great preaching and even a ceremony for a new Mount Pleasant Baptist Church artifact historical marking. More to come. As you can see, we have lots in store for the month and are excited that we will all be able to celebrate our 156 years of serving God and this community together. Hope to see you there. The Mount Pleasant Baptist Church Missions Ministry, Missions on the Go, presents the Haiti Back to School Supply Drive. The Haiti missions team needs your help in donating school items to the children of Haiti. Please donate backpacks with the following items from now through September 20th. Our goal is to send 150 backpacks filled with school supplies. Items to include are scientific calculators, pencils, pens, sharpeners, spiral notebooks, erasers, and deodorant for boys and girls. We have created an easy order list through Amazon, link shown below. Items purchased through this link will be delivered directly to the church. Please address your order to Haiti Mission Team. For more information, please contact Linda S. Emiroglu at 571-287-3571 or at mpbchaitimission@gmail.com. Thank you.
For more information, please visit mtpleasantbaptist.org. You're now in the know.
This concludes Mount Pleasant Baptist Church weekly announcements.